Hey, so this is a big setup. I'm going to talk about text analysis of 14 million digital library books. And then I'm going to give you a big letdown, which this is not something that I've ever done. Okay? But rather, I'm a librarian here in Doe Library, and really what I'm paying attention to is how can we access these sort of corpora, right? So a lot's changed over time, and copyright is actually this huge barrier in a lot of ways. And so there are new models for access that I'm going to explore a little bit. And so I'm going to come back to this. So the main sort of resource that I want to talk about today is the HathiTrust Resource Center, or HTRC. You can go to this URL, and this is basically the answer of where you can access those 14 million digital library books. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit just about the landscape for sort of researchers' mental models for what this access looks like versus sort of what libraries and publishers and vendors are looking at. So this is what I imagine the researcher's mental model is, which is I want to download my sort of corpus onto my laptop, right? And then I want to do the work. Or maybe I'll put it in the cloud and sort of go from there. But there are actually all these sort of barriers to that. Mostly it's the publishers and the vendors who own this content. And between these sort of connections, there are a lot of things to pay attention to. So a lot of the access we have to like scholarly journal articles or ebooks are actually going through library licenses with both publishers who might have specific scholarly journals or ebooks. And then more often through these sort of mega vendors like ProQuest and EBSCO who have their own licenses with these specific publishers. And so what happens is that most of those licenses, especially the ones that were signed 15, 20 years ago, say something like, you can't automate download of everything in the database, right? Or you can't sort of computationally, essentially they're saying you can't web scrape this content, right? And so that's another way, web scraping is a really popular way to get to that researcher mental model of just like putting stuff on your laptop. And so this is a sort of legal barrier that we have. And then also, it's worth noting that the way that these databases were designed is to give researchers like 1 or 2 articles at a time, right? So it's this classic like search and retrieval model of working. And so that's most of our library catalogs, most of our ebook platforms, scholarly journals. That's what those sort of vendors are offering us, right? Fortunately, there are some new ways to do things. This is a very costly one. So, and I should say, with ebooks, it's also an even more complicated situation in a lot of ways because we know like Google Books has a ton of this stuff. Because of copyright restrictions, they generally can't show you the full text. You've seen the snippet view, right? For things like after 1923. The same with the Internet Archive, so they have their own restrictions. When we sort of subscribe to a big platform for ebooks, a lot of times they're under pretty tight DRM. You might not even be able to sort of see or download more than 1 chapter at a time. Okay, so there's some of that. So you could go in and like scan the stuff yourself and do OCR. That's really costly and time consuming. You could also, you could also basically work with ebooks that are available through commercial platforms like Amazon. The DRM is pretty easy to break, and that's how actually a lot of early sort of work on full-length books worked. But that's also quite costly, all right? And so that's where we come back around to a couple things. So I'm not going to get into this website, but this is a library guide, Text Mining, Computational Text Analysis, where we've basically tried to bring together resources where you can get some sort of large-scale access to texts, right? And this involves APIs through big publishers like Elsevier, also like historic collections like Chronicling America. And what I'm going to focus on is the HathiTrust Research Center that I mentioned. And basically, HathiTrust, who's familiar with HathiTrust digital libraries? A few people have used that. Okay, so essentially just think of it, it is Google Books. Literally, these are the same scans that Google Books did with academic libraries. And then Google gave academic libraries a copy of every book they scanned, right? That was part of the deal. Libraries got together and sort of built this consortium, HathiTrust, where they have their own sort of repository of this stuff. And what HathiTrust has done is actually built in new models for access. So they're under the same copyright restrictions. They can't just give you the full view of a book published in 1980. But they've come up with 3 different models right now that people can access books for non-consumptive research. So one that probably not many of us are that interested is just through the interface. So you can run these, you can sort of build your corpus, choose the books you want, and run a canned algorithm, and it'll give you like tag clouds. A second one that they're working on a lot right now, but isn't quite as sort of open as we would want, is secured computing environments. So this is, you can launch a virtual machine, you can log in, and within that secured environment, you can access these texts. Right now, you can only do that with public domain materials, but I think in about a month or two, they're going to open that up to everything in the HathiTrust, which is huge. So this is like 14 million books. Think of basically all the books that are in the stacks of major academic research institutions. So you'd have access in that way. And then what I really want to focus on, though, is this third model, because it's available now, and it's called various different things. It's the extracted features data set. There's a piece of software called Feature Reader that I'll tell you briefly about. And essentially what this is, if you're familiar with bag of words approaches or n-grams or sort of tokens, you can access that stuff right now in HathiTrust. And you can just choose the books you want, you can download them, and then you can do analysis of those texts. So this is a pretty big change, and this just launched like 9 months ago, so not many researchers have really gotten in. This is an example of like a quick collection I put together, and this is just like authors from Nigeria that were in the main stacks here. And I wanted to show you, so it says download extracted features. This is, I'll show you sort of how you can install a plugin to your browser to do that. But I wanted to show you, this is published in 1981. There's another one from 2003. There's another from 1999. There's not really anywhere else that you can do this. So this is a pretty big change. You have access to these texts. And what those look like, one really big differentiator, so you can of course get the whole sort of Google Ngrams data set if you want, but what HTRC allows you to do is they have really robust metadata for every book, and you can actually select your corpus. So you might just want to work with a corpus of the 30 novels of a literary, an author that you're interested in. And Google Books doesn't allow you to do that. They also are not going to tell you much about what books are and are not in their corpus, right? So with HathiTrust, you have a lot of control for that. And what you're getting out of there are basically unigrams per page, you're getting sentence counts, part of speech tagging, and a lot of various features of the text, headers and footer and body, it can tell you that. And so when you work with the HTRC feature reader, which is essentially a Python library using pandas to sort of put this stuff into a data frame, you can start playing with this stuff. If you're interested in this and just sort of getting started and seeing how do I select text from the HathiTrust, how do I load them into the data frame and then start to do some simple work on them, I worked with Chris Hench and 3 undergraduates, Sasank Chaganti, Alex Chan, and Nathan McGee, on these data science modules that they're using in some courses here on campus to teach some of this. And essentially, so you can go to the GitHub site, and I'll show you where you can get these slides at the last slide. And it sort of walks you through how do you set this up, how do you use rsync to sort of download and get these extracted features into the sort of Python environment. And there's also a really great programming historian guide about what that sort of piece of software does for you. Don't worry about all of this, but just to summarize, it is a pretty simple thing. So if you want to build a corpus, you install that feature reader software, you log into HathiTrust, which anyone at all the UCs can do, most people can do. You don't even really need to log in if you're not a HathiTrust member, so don't worry too much about that. You install this sort of mashup to your browser, you find the titles you want, and then you download those extracted features. And then you'll be able to pull them in and start to do some work on those. And just to give you an idea, because people tend to think of like literary novels and stuff for this sort of work, which you can get there. You can get novelists, pretty recently. But here are some collections that are available on Hathi that are easy to work with. So the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. There are like over 1 million documents, and this is growing really quickly, of US federal documents. Like I was saying, you could put together really easily a corpus of novels by an author. Last thing I wanted to mention is if you're interested in digging deeper and hearing speakers who are using this tool, there's going to be an Uncamp on the 25th and 26th of January here. And so you can search HTRC Uncamp to find that. David Mimno and Elizabeth Larang and Lean Kiatso are going to be doing keynotes. And that's pretty much what I got for you. So thanks.